Hello, everyone. Today I have the pleasure to interview our second podcast guest for 2024, Kristina Jones. She's a speaker, she's an author, and an educator who is also a believer of our Lord Jesus Christ. And Kristina Transparency Jones is passionate about helping young girls, women acknowledge and heal from trauma and sexual abuse. As she continues in her journey of redemption and recovery, Kristina enjoys writing poetry, spoken words. Kristina released her first book titled Suppressed Wounds, Redemption and Recovery. I love the title. In March 2022. Her book recounts her life experience being sexually abused at age 3 to battling the effects of trauma and learning how to survive, and now to thriving with the help of the Holy Spirit. Kristina would share a little bit about her background and how she became a Christian, and then go on to discussing the topic for today, which is the effect of childhood trauma and sexual abuse. And at the end, Kristina will share some words of encouragement with our listeners. So my first question to you is today, can you share a little bit about your background?
Yes, ma'am. So I just wanted to say thank you for having me to be able to share about this topic. It's a very sensitive topic. Pretty much my background is my parents were teenage parents. I believe
Mhm.
my mom was 16, my dad was 15, but my mom became pregnant with me. Um, we grew up, started like in the kind of like in the projects. Um, Born and raised in St. Petersburg, Florida. I relocated now to Chicago, Illinois. I've been here now for 6 years.
Mhm.
Sexual abuse started for me as early as age 3. I
Okay.
remember telling my mom that
Mhm.
something was, you know, happening with my private parts. So we're gonna keep it
Mhm.
clean on here.
Yes.
And so my mother, she believed me, and that's a beautiful thing. So she took me to get examined. I'm not sure to this day exactly what the doctor found,
Mhm.
but it was determined that someone had touched me. And I was like, with this particular relative, I wasn't able to be around that person for years.
Mhm.
So then it was one of my mom's friends. And then age 5, it was a family member, which was a female relative, a female cousin that was a bit older than I. I
Mhm.
was 5 and she was about 13. Around that age, I was also introduced to pornography. And there's still images in my head that I can't get out today.
Mhm.
So, but to fast forward, like throughout from age 3 until about age 13, there was different encounters of sexual abuse and molestation from relatives and classmates and strangers and things as such. And age 14, I started going out into the streets. I had developed an addiction to sex, and I was having sex with multiple men. Age 15, I think that might be like the second question, like when did I become a Christian? So I'm gonna
Yes.
back up for a second.
But I did have a question before that, because something just came to my mind. Do you feel
Yes,
that once a person goes through that experience, that it opens up like a spiritual door for more abuse, like a cycle of abuse after that?
I do. I do. I'm putting on my headphones for you guys. But I do believe that sexual perversion met me at age 3.
Mhm.
There could have been things generational, that could have been in the bloodline. But
Mhm.
I do believe that it was a spiritual attack to try to keep me from being here today. Some people will often say, like, well, if God was there, why did God allow that to happen to you? I think instead of us focusing on, oh, that happened to me, and start to refocus and say it happened for me, because
Mhm.
I believe that God created us to become interdependent on each other so that I can go back and say, hey, I've been through that too. Let's get through this together.
Wow. That's a great message that you just said, that we sometimes tend to blame God. Why did God did not save me from going through such an experience? And that's interesting. It's because he wants to use you to share that and help other people that have gone through that. Thank you for sharing that. Can you share your story and how were you able to recover from your childhood trauma. And we heard about your story, but how can the person will be able to recover from the childhood trauma like what you went through?
I would say God, because even though at age 7, my mom and my stepdad got married, and we moved out of the house that we were staying at, where I was being molested by a female cousin or sexually abused by an older female cousin.
Mhm.
However, and even though age 8, that's when we started going to church and stuff like that, I was baptized at age 8, but it wasn't until I turned 15.
Mhm.
15 is when God opened up the eyes of my heart, like the song says,
Mhm.
or God took my heart of stone and turned it into a heart of flesh. So at that moment, I was able to realize that the things that I was doing, it wasn't just hurting me, but it was breaking God's heart. And I believe that God created us to worship him in both spirit and in truth. So if I'm not walking in spirit or walking in truth, then what is my true purpose?
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how did it affect you as an adult?
As an adult, oh wow. So as an adult, still now, sometimes, having issues with like boundaries, it's hard for me to say no. Now, I'm not saying to sex, but
Mhm.
no to like certain things like, oh, can you do this? Can you do that? Be like, you know what? Is it necessary? Is it purposeful? Is it going to be edifying to God or to the kingdom?
Yeah.
Am I just doing this to just try to people please?
Mhm.
um I had really, like, when I would get into relationships or situationships with different men,
Mhm.
I got into situations where I would be the enabler, and
Mhm.
I felt like, I could fix them. And it's like, no, only God can
Mhm.
change a person's heart. And I thought that, I wasn't, just me wasn't good enough. I had to try to go above and beyond to do certain things for men, just to keep them happy, just to make sure that
Mhm.
they're okay. When here it is, I was breaking on the inside myself. I was feeding my insecurity of needing to be needed. And I believe that, because women, we're by nature nurturers,
Mhm.
and God had
Mhm.
gifted us with that ability. However,
Mhm.
I believe that God, the ordained mate that God has for you, the husband that God has for you, God would allow you to do that for your husband. When we begin to take out those wifely duties and try to overly compensate who we are in a relationship, that's how we get hurt. And it's like God is saying, I didn't tell you this was your husband, but here it is. I'm doing all these wifely duties, and I'm trying to figure out, why do I keep getting hurt? And it was because I was feeding that need of needing to be needed. And again, allowing myself to enable these men to depend on me. But when I met my husband, that changed, because he's like, and I kept trying to like prove my worth to him. And it's
Mhm.
like God was telling him my secrets, and God was ministering to me through him to say, you know what, you are enough.
Wow,
So I'm walking in that today.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's interesting that you mentioned that because it's a cycle that like in the adults, it stays with them, and
Right.
until they heal, until the person heals, they continue to make those mistakes in relationship. So I'm going to go on to my next questions. The topic for today is the effect of childhood trauma and sexual abuse. So according to the National Children's Alliance report for 2022, it stated, and I was like in shock with the amount of children, 600,000 children that are abused in the US each year. And 247 of those cases, 247, 543 cases of involved sexual abuse. And it was also reported that all these cases were not disclosed or people were charged or convicted. This
Hmm.
indicates a problem with sexual abuse, and it may be more predominant than the federal statistics are showing. So, in fact, 91% of our children that are sexually abused is from someone they know and trusted, like you said, family. It starts like a cycle, and it can be a generational cycle, like you mentioned.
Right.
For example, respect to the situation that recently just happened, and I'm going to keep this like no names and stuff like that. There was a young girl, 13 years old, that was
Mm-hmm.
being abused and was unalived by the stepfather. I don't know if you heard of the story in
Mm-mm.
Kissimmee. And it was reported by a school friend whom the victim had apparently shared with her, that she informed her mother of what was going on, but the mother did
Right.
not believe her. And I'm not saying this is true or not, but I'm using it as an example of when parents refuse to validate when their children report that abuse, and they negate what the children are reporting to them. Can you share a little bit about what do you recommend for mothers whose children demonstrate, concerning behaviors that may point to abuse? And if you can elaborate a little bit about the first part.
Okay. So yeah, I think once I read what you were mentioning, I had never heard of that story before, but it is common. It's very common for it to happen with relatives. It's very common for it to happen with strangers because, like I said, for me, it was strangers. It was people from school. It was someone on a church bus, you know. But my encouragement to mothers or parents in general is to not be afraid to have those uncomfortable conversations with your child. And I think in this situation, the mother didn't believe the child.
Mhm,
I think the other key point is, you know, hurt people, as we've heard before. So
mhm,
if the mother or the father or the guardian has not dealt with their childhood traumas, whether it's sexual, physical, emotional, or mental traumas, then it's going to be hard for them to like give their child something that they never received themselves.
mhm,
So getting counseling, not being afraid of counseling, not being afraid to, join some support groups, ask other mothers or fathers and say, hey, have you ever experienced something like this? Peer mentoring is very important as well, so
mhm.
that you'll feel like you have a community. And sometimes someone may say something that might, oh, I didn't think to ask that. Um, I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. The first question that I asked you about concerning when a child reports those concerns to the parents, what they should do.
Mhm.
I think that you mentioned creating a safe space for the child.
Yes, yes, that definitely ties into um say, like, again, if the parent has dealt with issues themselves, it's hard for them to create a safe space.
Mhm,
So they would need to deal with the things that may have happened with them
mhm,
first, but also realizing that, okay, God has ordained you to be this parent, so you have to parent this child. And some parents will say, well, no one's ever taught me how to be a parent, but this is the time where you have to, like, zone in, because
mhm,
God has ordained you to protect this little person.
mhm,
So do the best that you can. So getting in groups, if you don't know what to ask or how to ask those questions, get find other people who may know how to. Watch some YouTube videos. How do I identify these behaviors in my child? What kind of conversations can I have with my child to try to help um them deal with something that they've gone through, or to help
mhm,
prevent them from going through certain things. There was a just quickly, there was an article of, I think it something happened in Georgia or Alabama somewhere, where a 5-year-old was being abused on a school bus by an older student.
mhm.
So the mother found out about it. She went to the school. So that's another thing, advocating for your child. Your child
Yes,
comes to
very
tell you,
important.
hey, something happened. Believe them first.
Mhm,
Believe them
mhm,
first and go get the help that you need. Like my mother, she with all of these incidents, my mom believed me.
mhm,
She took me to try to get the help that I needed. She took me to a doctor. She contacted the authorities more than once, because when I was out there at age 14, being with multiple men, grown
mhm,
men, and my parents found out about it. My mother went directly to the police station. She took me to the
mhm,
SAVE clinic. It's called Sexual Assault Victims Examination Clinic. So see
mhm.
if there's something like that available, in your place, if something like that happens to your child, because the doctors can do an examination as well.
Great that you pointed out that the parents have to be that advocate and believe the child and fight for
Yeah.
that child, not give up on that child. And like you said, it's so important because a lot of parents are not taught how to be parents. No child comes
Right.
with a manual. But
Right.
we learn from trial and errors, but the important thing is believing the child and being that advocate for the child so that they can
Right.
heal. So how can parents teach their children to report this type of abuse? And because children, most likely they stay quiet or they will share with perhaps maybe a friend, a hard time people believing them because sometimes they don't know how to articulate what they're going through.
Right. Right. So that's what, what I was kind of saying before is, or maybe I didn't mention it yet, but when it comes down to like the private parts, I'm not going to mention the name of the private parts for the
Mhm.
sake of, screening out this interview, but like name the private parts so that a child would know, like, oh, okay, so this isn't called my pocketbook, but this is called my, or this isn't called my hoo-ha, this is called my, you
Mhm.
know. So if they're in a situation, say if they're at school
Mhm.
and someone is touching on them and they
Mhm.
happen to touch that private area, then they're able to articulate that, they're able to communicate that to their parent or guardian and say, hey, someone touched my, let's say, butt, you
Mhm.
know, or so then, but if you're trying to coddle them or trying to protect them, their innocence by not naming their body parts, what their body parts
Mhm.
are, then what can happen is, if your little daughter Susie has an actual pocketbook or an actual purse, and Jimmy in class touches that pocketbook or that purse,
Mhm.
and they say, they come home and say, mommy, Jimmy touched my pocketbook, and you're like, he touched your what? Because you're not saying exactly what these body parts are. Just like this, these are our fingers, this is our nose, this is our
Mhm.
lips. Then we have other body parts. Um, which is very, very important. But if you as a parent are very uncomfortable with talking about these things because you don't want to, or you feel like you're exposing your child to so much stuff, just keep in mind that whatever you're not teaching them, the world is teaching them. And if Satan's
Mhm.
job is to kill, steal, and destroy, he's going to try that. He's going to try to do his best with killing, destroying, and causing all kinds of confusion. That's why these public schools can teach about homosexuality. They can teach about being a trans and saying, oh, well, although you were born a boy, you can be a girl. Boys can be princesses too. Like, you know, so having those hard conversations.
It is very important for the parents to take that role of teaching the children. And I know that in some culture, it's kind of like a taboo to speak about those certain things like that. And the parents feel like embarrassed or they feel like
Right,
it's a taboo, especially when it comes to sexual abuse. It's almost like they have to keep their mouths closed and not speak about it. And that does more
right,
damage than good. So I'm glad that you
right.
pointed that out. And how can parents keep their child safe from this type of individuals, those perpetrators? How can they keep themselves safe from this type of people? Because they have some signs and some traits that that they carry with them that you can know that that person is dangerous to your child.
Well, I would say this, as long as we're on this side of heaven
Mm.
and we have the flesh and we have our adversary, the devil, roaming and to see whom he can destroy, I wouldn't put it past anyone,
Mm.
whether it could be grandpa, daddy, mommy, auntie, sister. I know people close to me who were molested and sexually abused by their own siblings.
Mhm.
The taboo thing, like you said, in certain cultures, of not wanting to talk about this, just think about, okay, you know what? I'm going to do this because I want to save my child's life. I've worked in social services. I've been in social services now for probably about 18 years. So
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of different cases. Even a case where a 2-year-old had um, an STD, a sexually transmitted
Mhm.
disease. So if we're not talking about these things, like say if something is happening to your child and they end up pregnant and they're like, their body's changing, they don't know what's going on, and this is a 12-year-old child. You know, so that's why it's important to have these conversations. Or there's someone who contracted HIV, and pretty soon, like if they don't get the treatment they need, they're going to have full-blown AIDS, and they may pass away from that. So we got to have those conversations. So some traits to look for in a person is like, are they overly friendly with your child? Are they trying to keep secrets with your child? Are they giving them like money? Do they seem to just try to, like they're taking some type of interest? They're trying to force your child to give them a hug or give them a kiss. That's why boundaries is very, very important. There are even songs for little kids to learn about boundaries. So if you can like go to YouTube and look that up, it's some really cute song. But anyway, a child shouldn't have to feel like they need to hug or kiss someone if they don't feel comfortable. If this person is untruthful, if they're ungodly, they have no fear of God, they have no accountability, that they've dealt with some trauma in their own life that they're not ready to deal with themselves. I think what else, like just that feeling that you have, if you have the spirit of discernment, and you're feeling like something just doesn't feel right. But I know sometimes there's cases where the mom may choose their significant other over their child. And that's a really, really bad issue. And there's even been situations where the mother has been jealous of their child because their mate has taken interest in their child. But let's not get it twisted. Some mothers are abusing their children too. We had a case where, of course, we're not giving any names, but had a situation where the daughter was being abused by the mother, and the mother was the one who brought her to our organization to get her daughter the help that she felt like her daughter needed. But it's like, but you're the one that's abusing her. That's people like that, it's very hard. It's very heartbreaking.
Yes. Well, you were very thorough with explaining what to look for the perpetrators. And like you said, there's like sometimes no way of telling if the person, and I will say also that we also have to be very careful in the churches as well, because in churches, there's also people that join the churches, but nobody, it's not like they do background checks or anything on individuals. And there's people in churches that also do those kind of things. So we have to also be very careful, because they may say, oh, he's a brother, or, he's from church, and they take an interest of coming to the house and visit, and, they become very confident in everything with the family, but you never could be too careful. So how can we educate mothers with young children on how to detect red flags of their significant others before they establish a living relationship? And I think you share a little bit about that, but if you can elaborate a little bit more. Like you said, there's some mothers that may become jealous of the daughter or the son if the significant other is taking interest on the child. Before they move in with someone, what are some things that they should probably be looking for and not see the red flags before it becomes a disaster in the relationship?
I would say if this person is overly sexual, if they have any type of addictions, whether it's drug, alcohol, pornography, if you get into a relationship with this person and you know these things up front and you feel like, oh, I can save this person, I can change them, you can't do that. Also, no one is born saying, hey, I want to be a drug addict, I want to be a prostitute, I want to be, I want to be an alcoholic when I grow up. We need to go to the root of these issues. So you don't know what that person could be dealing with. So again, it would be if they're trying to keep secrets with your child, or like, here it is, you guys are on, like, say if you go on a date or you're courting, and this person, wants to take you and your child out to a park, but you notice that they're like zone in on your child. Now, I do understand that there's some adults who have gone through childhood trauma, so they become overly protective, so sometimes that can't be, it'd be hard to distinguish, like, is this person just being really, really weird with my child, or are they really concerned?
Mhm.
So those are definitely some things. Also, if you about to move in, I would encourage, premarital counseling, get with a
Mhm.
pastor. Some people that can kind of look from the outside and be from the outside and look in and provide you with godly counsel, because
Mhm.
I believe that God has placed counselors, there's safety in a multitude of counselors. That's
Yes.
scripture. So if there's somebody saying, hey girl, I don't know. I don't know about that guy.
Mhm.
Or if there's a guy saying, brother, I don't know about that young lady. It's just something that doesn't seem right.
Mhm.
And then also listen to your child, especially if you have a good relationship with your child, a good open communication with your child. And if they're like, oh, this feels really awkward.
Mhm.
I don't feel safe around this person. Those are definitely some red flags to look for. And I'm telling you, this is just being honest. Once
Mhm.
you engage into sex, you enter a covenant with that person, and it's hard to break free from that once you've
Mhm.
gotten yourself tied up with that person in that way. It's hard to break that apart. So try to, be sober minded, renew your mind daily so that you can be focused and to really hear from the Holy Spirit for
Mhm.
direction.
That's very interesting what you just said for the parents, if they're in church, to get a leader from church to help them make that decision. And also, you mentioned about the children are very good judge of characters. They
Hmm.
will let you know that, they're not feeling comfortable with a person, or like the person gives me the heebie-jeebies, they will say something like that. You gotta
Yeah.
trust that. How does this person heals? Survivors of neglect, childhood trauma, sexual abuse, and because we are not taught to heal. Individuals are not taught to heal from trauma. What is your take on that?
So with healing, I believe this. I believe that healing is a lifelong process.
Mm,
And I've came to this conclusion based on experiences that I've had. Because
mm,
even though some of those things that happened to me was like almost 30 years ago,
mm,
I didn't realize until probably less than a year ago that I was triggered by something. I was triggered by,
mm,
I don't know what it was. I think it was something that I seen and I was automatically triggered.
mhm,
And I realized that the little girl inside of me, the little 3-year-old girl,
mhm.
needed to cry, you
Okay.
know. So I had
Mhm,
to let her cry. And it's important that we understand that even though we're these big old grown-ups, there's
mhm,
still a little child inside of us that, may have never expressed themselves. And to be honest, the decisions that we're making today is based on things that happened to us in our childhood, whether it be good, whether it be bad.
mhm,
So being able to identify those things, you know what? Whoa, I didn't properly deal with that. So some people believe, because like I said, I've grown up in church, I've been in ministry for a while, so I've seen different scenarios where people are like, oh yeah, I'm set free, I'm delivered, I'm sanctified, and this ain't gonna happen to me. Like, no, that's why the word says, count it all joy when you face various trials.
mhm,
Because we know that the testing and those things are going to help produce perseverance in us. And there's going to be other things that come along
mhm,
that we have to learn how to adapt to.
mhm,
These things, the things that happen to us in our child, if we don't deal with those or address those issues, again,
mhm,
they're going to spill over into our adulthood, causing us to do things and say things to people, or operate in a manner of fear.
mhm.
There's so many things that we don't deal with it. So
Yes,
that's why I say
psychosomatic symptoms as well. A lot of
yes,
different things that it kind of manifests in the body. And like
right,
you mentioned also the triggers, there's a lot of triggers that you gotta be aware. And sometimes it also comes up, like if a person doesn't take care of it and doesn't do the healing process throughout their
right,
life, it comes up when either they're middle age or when they're entering a phase
hmm,
like marriage or divorce and things like that.
right,
It's very interesting that you mentioned that, so people can know that it is a continual process.
hmm,
Like we are Christian, we have to continue working on our salvation and also working on our healing daily,
right,
because it might be triggers that sometimes we might not be aware of that may just pop up and trigger
right.
that unhealed part of the person.
Right. That's so true. That's true. And understanding that, the Lord said, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So sometimes we have to remember to say, this isn't my burden to carry.
Mhm.
I give it to you, Lord. You said that you have not given me the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a
Mhm.
sound mind. So I'm going to trust you in this. This is hard, but I'm going to trust you. And
Mhm.
that increases our faith, because the word also says that it's impossible to please the Lord without faith.
Yes.
So